Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nathan on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to the 36th episode of The Rolling Stone, where I give my initial thoughts, ideas, and impressions and analysis on stories that are currently making their way through the news cycle. It is the weekend before Christmas, which is just insane because there is only this. Well, honestly, there's only this weekend, there's next week, and then half of another week, and then 2020 is right on our doorstep. We start the 20s all over again, which is just insane. So, here we are, and oh boy. The world has gone nuts. I mean, it already was, but it has gone nuts. And the first story that we just have to talk about this week. It would be remiss of me if I didn't say anything about this at all. Is that history has been made? Yes, another historical moment, my friends, because the House of Representatives has impeached President Trump. Possibly, maybe, perhaps. So, this past week, the House of Representatives, along party lines, voted to impeach President Trump on two charges: obstruction of Congress and abuse of power, which is honestly no surprise. People who are holding rallies in cities about for pro-impeachment, people who were on Twitter, just absolutely celebrating that, OMG, Trump has been impeached, this is the best day of my life, happiest day of my life, finally. Really, this was all pretty much in the bag from the very beginning. We knew that the House was going to impeach. We knew that it was going to come down to party lines. And since the Democrats have a majority in the House, well, it's not a surprise what happened. But what is interesting is this little detail. This entire impeachment is actually unconstitutional. And it's unconstitutional in two ways. So, the first way that it's unconstitutional is because of the charges that were actually brought against Trump. Again, the two charges which the House brought against him and which were voted, right, on which he was impeached. The two charges upon which Trump was impeached were abuse of Congress, obstruction of Congress, and then abuse of power. The problem, though, is that neither of these charges is listed in the Constitution. The Constitution says that officials can be impeached from their offices for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Neither of these constitutes a high crime or a misdemeanor. That's the gag. So, I'm going to mispronounce his name, I know. Alan Dershowitz. He is a lawyer of much renown, actually, Professor Emeritus of Harvard Law School, actually. He wrote a piece this past week in The Hill, and this is how he described it, okay? Alan Dershowitz said this, okay? He says that neither obstruction of Congress or abuse of power are impeachable offenses because neither is mentioned in the Constitution, like what I just said. He says, quote, both charges are so vague and open-ended that they could be applied in partisan fashion by a majority of the House against almost any president from the opposing party. Both are precisely what the framers had rejected at their constitutional convention. Both raise the greatest danger, in the words of Alexander Hamilton, that the decision to impeach will be based on the comparative strength of parties rather than on innocence or guilt. That is very important. It's also important to remember that obstruction of Congress, it's not really a crime. Obstruction of justice is a crime, but obstruction of Congress is not listed as a federal crime. This charge was just completely made up out of thin air. What is even more interesting is that this obstruction of Congress charge comes from the fact that when the House was holding hearings about the whole Ukraine Misheva, remember the quid pro quo thing between Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine that happened during a phone call at the end of July of this year, remember that? Well, during those hearings, the House and the committees that were doing this, they subpoenaed certain officials in the executive branch of the government saying, hey, you have to come over, you have to take the oath, take the stand, and give evidence. Trump and the White House said nothing doing. These people aren't coming over, and they are not going to testify because they have executive privilege. Executive privilege is a real thing. In fact, President Obama used it 9 different times to keep people from the executive branch from testifying or speaking to Congress. And so people were saying, okay, let's have this go through the courts. Let the court system, decide who has the proper authority here. In an impeachment trial, does the House's power to subpoena witnesses override the executive branch's power of executive privilege to keep people from testifying and speaking to the other branches of the government? Let's do that. Let's settle this question. The majority in the House said nothing doing, and they just made up this charge. He obstructed Congress, even though we don't even know who was in the right at this point, right? It hasn't gone through the courts. People haven't ruled on that. That's the first way that this was unconstitutional. The second thing that's unconstitutional about this, which was pointed out on Twitter by the great one himself, Mark Levin, is that the House voted for impeachment, right? So Donald Trump has been impeached, technically, again. But now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is refusing to actually send the impeachment charges to the Senate. Remember, the House of Representatives impeaches the president and other officials, right? But the Senate is where the trial is held, okay? The House basically says, yes, this official is impeached. In our estimation, he has committed, treason, bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors. And then it goes to the Senate. And then the Senate forms its own court, right? The Senate becomes a courtroom, and then the Senate basically does the same thing. They call witnesses, they hear testimony, they argue back and forth, and then the Senate rules whether the president or other officials is guilty or not guilty. This is what happened again. A little over 20 years ago, just about exactly 20 years ago, honestly, with Bill Clinton. The House of Representatives impeached Bill Clinton on obstruction of justice and perjury, if I'm remembering correctly, and then it went to the Senate. The Senate held its trial, and the Senate found him not guilty, right? Well, according to Mark Levin, Nancy Pelosi has refused to send those charges to the Senate, meaning that the Senate cannot actually have its trial. And as Mark Levin was explaining, this is blatantly unconstitutional because now that the House has actually impeached Trump, its job is over. Its role is over. It is now supposed to hand the ball to the Senate. And now the Senate is where all the action is going to take place. But Nancy Pelosi isn't doing that, supposedly, because she wants Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to promise and guarantee that there is going to be a fair trial. Because McConnell has openly said that this whole thing is a farce and a sham and an embarrassment, honestly. And so Pelosi is saying, no, not until you guarantee that there's going to be a fair trial will these charges of impeachment be sent over. And Levin was saying that now that the House is impeached, the Senate has sole adjudication over the impeachment process. So Nancy Pelosi is actually preventing the Senate from performing its constitutional duties now that this whole impeachment process has been started and now it is rolling on down. So that is, that's a huge point right there. But there are also some other things, okay, that this story really shows. In the first place, I cannot count how many times that the elite, whether that is on Capitol Hill, whether that's in Hollywood, whether it's in Silicon Valley, whatever, so many people have been saying that you have to impeach. The House has to impeach him. Trump has to be impeached. It has to be impeached because we are in an existential crisis. The good of democracy demands it. The continuation of democracy in America demands that he be impeached. And this really shows the vacuousness, right? The emptiness, the void that is the word democracy in this setting, and also these arguments that Trump has to be impeached for the good and the continuation of democracy. Because here's the thing, gang. Anyone can say that they're defending democracy, but are you really defending democracy? Like we just said, these charges, one is made up because they didn't even wait for the courts to decide a pertinent issue, and another one, abuse of power, it's so vague, right? That, like Alan Dershowitz said, that, by that logic, every president who has ever held the office, with the possible exception of George Washington, should have been impeached, right? So you've got that, plus you have Nancy Pelosi refusing to allow the Senate to do its constitutional duty. You might be defending your idea of democracy, but you are not defending the constitutional order. And that is the real takeaway. That's the real point that I wanted to make here. This first real point that I wanted to make. Anyone can say that you're defending democracy, but are you actually defending the constitutional order? For my money, I would much rather have people defend the constitutional order than some, vague term about democracy. Because here's the thing about democracy, the word especially, it can be redefined like any other word. I mean, just look over at the UK, at the United Kingdom. They just had an election. And the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and his Tory, so-called Conservative Party, won by a landslide, picked up a ton of seats in the UK Parliament. And he has been pretty much re-elected as Prime Minister. For the past week, there have been protests against that. There have been protests against, an election that was legally called, legally held, and which one side legally won, which led John Hindraker over at Powerline, the website Powerline, to say this wonderful line. He said that for these people, for the elite, for the ideologues, it's only democracy if they win. That is huge. So yeah, anyone can claim that, and can claim that they are defending democracy. Are you actually defending the constitutional order? We've had tons of politicians and entertainers and technological gurus here on our side of the pond claiming that they are the great defenders of democracy because they support impeachment, etc., 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 but they have not been protecting or defending the constitutional order. And yeah, when the constitutional order goes and all you have left is this vague word democracy that is going to be controlled by the side that actually controls language, yeah, that's going to take you into really, really bad places right off the bat. And that's the first thing. And now the second thing, okay, which is a slightly minor point, there were so many people on Twitter this past week, like I said, celebrating the fact that Trump has finally been impeached. Like Rashida Tlaib said when she won, and was sworn into Congress almost a year ago in January, we're going to impeach the mother effer, right? When she said that about Trump, so many people were living that living that quote out and just so excited and saying that Trump is no longer president and Trump has to leave now and this is great and this is awesome, when none of that is true, right? Trump doesn't have to leave office. He is still the president because he is not forced out of office unless the Senate finds him guilty, right? And it really showed it to me. It really was another fact, I guess. It reinforced my already strong belief that the American education system is garbage, because this is basic civics that everyone, all of us, should have learned when we were, middle school, at the very, very least in high school, right? But the fact that so many people don't even know, how the basics of how the federal government works really says a lot. I mean, lays it right out in the open for everyone to see how the American education system is. And the right complains day in and day out about how bad the education system is, about how poor it is, about how corrupt it is, about how ideologically driven it is, how it's not about knowledge. It's not about knowledge. It's not about wisdom. It's not even about facts and figures anymore. It's simply about pushing a narrative. And yet, for all of that, nothing ever gets done. And it made me think that if you want to win at politics permanently, then you have to have a long-term plan for winning the culture, right? Because culture and politics, they go together. But in order to win the culture, then you really have to win the education system, where people are formed, where people are taught something or other. And the fact that the right is very good at complaining, but doesn't really do a whole awful lot besides that, really drove home this point that if you really want to win the long-term game, then you are going to have to take the education system. Point right here at the ignorance of people who, again, didn't know how the impeachment process even worked. And the final point that I'm going to say about this, before we get into all the Christmas stuff, is that Ana Navarro, who is a self-identified Republican contributor to CNN, she was saying how this is going to be a black stain on Trump, that whether, again, impeachment succeeds or not in the Senate, the important thing is that Trump will have to live with this for his whole life. It will be in his obituary. It will be in his history, in the history books, that he was impeached. That is his legacy. And my own personal prediction, I don't like the prediction game a lot, but my own personal prediction about this is that Trump is going to wear this as a badge of honor, right? He is going to take this as proof that the elites, the swamp, whatever you want to call it, whatever he calls it anymore these days, I can't keep up, was out to get him. So he's not going to be ashamed about this impeachment. In fact, he is going to wear this on his sleeve as the president who was so effective, who was so great and so wonderful and so good that his ideological enemies, tried to impeach him, did impeach him, and they failed even there. That's what he's going to do, especially on Twitter. So that is my prediction. Instead of it being the black stain and the embarrassment of his legacy and of his life, he's going to be riding this for the rest of his life. This is going to be, he loves to compare himself to Andrew Jackson. This is going to be his Battle of New Orleans. Okay, that's what it's going to be the equivalent of for Trump. But I've been talking too long about this story, as fascinating as it is. It's time to get into the attacks on Christmas. Okay, I know elites will say that there is no such thing as the war on Christmas. What are you guys smoking? There ain't no war on Christmas except in your heads, right? And now apparently that's even a racist alt-right dog whistle. Oh my God. Like I said, gang, I can't keep up with everything that is going on. It's flying so fast and furious anymore. But regardless of what the elites say, there is a war on Christmas going on. If you watched the On the Stone video, the Tuesday on the Stone video this past week, which you can watch right here, I talked a little bit about this, about Netflix and Porta dos Fundos and their comedy, The First Temptation of Christ, and about how that was another example of the war on Christmas, right? One of the incarnations that it had taken this year. And in that video, I briefly mentioned Aisha Harris, who in 2013 wrote in Vice. Was it Vice? Yes, Vice. That Santa Claus should be portrayed as a penguin, so as not to ostracize, black children. Well, that is now passé. The idea that the jolly old Saint Nicholas should be a penguin, that's passé. The UK Daily Mirror, a newspaper, conducted a poll, right? They asked 400 people on both sides of the pond, in the UK and in the US, if Santa Claus should be portrayed as either A, a woman, or B, to be really, really edgy, gender neutral. And over a quarter of the people polled, so 27%, said yes, Santa Claus should be portrayed as either a woman or as gender neutral, non-binary, right? For purposes of tolerance and love and diversity and inclusivity. And have I forgotten any? If I have, just tell me in the comments and I will do a mea culpa. So yes, a full quarter of people, according to this poll, say that Santa Claus, in all sense and purposes of the word, should not be Santa Claus. Oh boy. Okay, so first and foremost, Santa Claus, our word Santa Claus, is the Anglicization of the Dutch word or Dutch name Sinterklaas. And Sinterklaas is Dutch for Saint Nicholas. And the Saint Nicholas that they're talking about is actually Nicholas of Myra, who was actually a Christian bishop in the early centuries AD. He was part of the Council of Nicaea, as a matter of fact, where Arianism, the heresy that said that, oh gosh, Arianism. Now that I've said it, I'm going to completely forget what Arianism was about. It had to do with the nature of Jesus Christ. I believe that Arianism said that the Son had not always existed. Christians have our idea of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and we believe that all three persons of the Trinity are co-equal. They're all equally God, right? It's not like the Father came first and then created the Son and the Holy Spirit. Arianism, which was created by another bishop named Arian, said, no, there was a point in time when the Son did not exist, right? The Father created him. So the Council of Nicaea was all set to basically tell Arian, you know what, you're full of it, now shut up and kindly go away, please. So, to get back on track with Santa Claus, that is to say that Santa Claus, our idea of Santa Claus, the very name Santa Claus, it's referencing a real person, a real man, right? Who lived, breathed, worked, bled, and eventually died. He suffered a lot. He was in prison for a number of years under the persecution of the Emperor Diocletian. Under Diocletian's, which was, my Roman history is a little rusty, which was the last major persecution against Christians initiated by the Roman Empire, right? Nicholas was part of that, was in jail and, for that, during that persecution. So, Santa Claus is real in that sense that he is based on a real person, a real man in history, a man. That is the main takeaway, a real man. So saying that, Santa Claus is now a woman, saying Santa Claus is now gender neutral, non-binary, it is a huge slap in the face to the actual memory and work of the real Saint Nicholas, who lived, worked, bled, suffered, died, the whole 9 yards, like all of us do, right? He was a man just like all of us. We live, we breathe, we work, we suffer, we die, right? He did those things too, just way back in the past. But that doesn't matter, because anything that, when his name, again, Santa Claus comes from St. Nicholas, when his name is then taken and mutated into a woman or something non-binary, something that he never was, it is a huge slap in the face to a real man who lived and walked and worked in the world. But even if that doesn't, that's not exactly your cup of tea. If you don't like that, then you can always say that the image of Santa Claus that we have, the fat, jolly old elf, with his stomach like a bowl full of jelly and everything. Well, we've had that since the middle of the 19th century, when Clement Moore wrote The Night Before Christmas. So it's tradition. We have just inherited that image of Santa Claus, like we've inherited so many of the traditions of Christmas, of Christmas time. Christmas lights, Christmas trees, candy canes, stars, Christmas lights, even, right? Those are all traditions that stretch way, way back in the past that have been handed down to us. And the thing about traditions is that you really just can't take them and then turn them over on their heads so that they appease a certain modern fad. And that's the real issue here. That is the real issue here, because when you say that Santa Claus should be a woman or needs to be a woman or non-binary, what you're saying is that Christmas itself is insufficient. I'm not going to say that every Christmas is wonderful, because it's not. Right? The day itself and your lived experience through a Christmas might be really, really bad. Like, say, your spouse died that year, or if your spouse died, on Christmas Day or on Christmas Eve or something like that. But the day itself is, like I said on this past Tuesday in our regular video, it is the second holiest time for Christians, because it's about the birth of Christ. Right? And so Christmas itself, it transcends the political. It transcends it. It speaks to the human soul about things that are not completely of this world. Joy, peace, salvation. Those are things that really can't be found in the world. That was one of the genius points of Christianity. And about, so to take one of those traditions of Christmas, and believe me, it will be done with all the traditions of Christmas, because one tradition is never enough for these ideologues, to take Christmas and to suck out everything that makes it Christmas by making it reflect a modern day fad. Right, a fad and a fashion for the present day. By making it reflect that, you have to suck out everything that is timeless about it, which speaks to the human soul across the globe and across all times and eras. And when you do that, you're doing two things. First of all, you are destroying, literally you're destroying the soul of Christmas, because you're saying that the things that made Christmas aren't important, or they are actually prohibiting progress, right? So it's no longer Christmas you're celebrating. It is what the culture says Christmas should be like. It is Christmas, again, made not in the image of Christ, but in the image of man. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it says it does the same mistake, it does the same thing that every ideology does. It takes the human person, the human experience, and it reduces it to one single thing, like Marxism does with economics, or like fascism does with the bonds of national brotherhood. And that's what's happening here, right? Ideologues are reducing the human person and the human experience down to the lowest common denominator for the sole purpose of promoting their ideology and the current fads and fancies that they want. That's why this story makes me mad. That's why it is another example of the assault on Christmas. That's story number 2. Story number 3, our final story on the Rolling Stone here before Christmas. Okay. Hallmark has fallen. Yep. We had a 2 for 2, people. Chick-fil-A and Hallmark came right afterwards. In case you missed this story, Hallmark, or it was announced, it was revealed that Hallmark and its parent company, the Crown Media, they were going to air some commercials that had been created by Zola. It's a jewelry company. Their specialties are wedding, engagement rings, things like that. And these commercials that Zola made featured same-sex pairs, right? In same-sex weddings. Well, there was a huge backlash to this when it was revealed that these were going to air on the Hallmark Channel, right? Mostly conservative, Christian moms who are about the only people who watch the Hallmark Channel. They said no. Okay? I don't want that when I watch Hallmark movies. This is my little escape fantasy, okay? Don't do this, please. And Hallmark actually did a 180 and said, okay, the commercials won't air. Don't worry, people. And then, as anyone could have predicted, there was a huge backlash against the backlash. The Twitter Stasi had a heyday. I mean, just raking Hallmark over the coals. The media followed suit. Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, a presidential candidate for the 2020 election, got in onto the action, saying that Hallmark was very disappointing because Hallmark was being intolerant against just, different forms of love, and love is love, and, what's the problem here, people? I mean, when a presidential candidate, right, weighed in on a decision that the Hallmark Channel made. That's how crazy it got. And Hallmark, again, did a complete 180 and said, okay, the commercials, they'll run, please, just don't hate us. And so, of course, conservative people, they were, especially, conservative women or women on the right who, watch the Hallmark Channel. I've watched reviews of Hallmark movies, which is why I don't watch the Hallmark Channel. If you love the Hallmark Channel, however, Gesundheit, I am sorry that Hallmark, pretty much threw in the towel, cashed in the chips, and took the path of least resistance. I am genuinely, I'm genuinely sorry that did happen. Okay, never mind my jokes about Hallmark movies and the Hallmark Channel, but. So people on the right, women on the right especially, they were naturally and justifiably upset. I'm going to give you that, right? If you love Hallmark movies, if you love the Hallmark Channel, and you really didn't want, more of the cultural fads of the day that you don't believe in, or maybe you just wanted an escape of it. You don't want to be hammered with it 24/7, And you just want that as your escape. That is your ability to escape. I understand completely why you are mad, and you have every right to be mad. However, my contention is that the right is mad, or whoever on the right is mad at Hallmark is mad for the wrong reasons. The reason why I'm mad at Hallmark isn't because so much that they caved to the ideologues again. They caved to the mob once again. The real reason why I am angry at Hallmark is because they showed, by showing that they are just as big of squishes as the NBA and giving in to the Twitter Stasi and their allies, they showed that they have no commitment. They don't have any commitment to anything. They were going to allow the commercials to air, and then when there was a backlash, they reversed course and said, no, sorry, they're not going to air. And then when there was a backlash against that, they reversed course again and said, well, of course they're going to air. Please don't hate us. Their sole purpose was to get the least amount of people to hate them. They knew at that point that they were going to get hated no matter what they did, so they just wanted to be hated by the least amount of people. That is not commitment. If they had actually been committed to these commercials in the first place, and even when people were complaining, saying, we don't want to see that when we are trying to escape through your Hallmark movies. If they had basically thumbed their nose at these people and said, tough toenails, this is what we believe now, get used to it or go home, I would have had more respect for them, because at least they would have been committed to something. Even, if I disagreed with it, I can say, honestly, if you have an actual commitment to something, at least I can say that you have that you are loyal to an idea, that you are working for something that is greater and above yourself, besides just your own personal well-being and your own personal gain. And there's a great quote, actually, about commitment, which comes from, personally, my favorite musical, 1776. If you haven't seen it, you really, really should, in the upcoming year, especially in June and July. It's all about the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But the quote that I'm talking about, which is, if I was pushed up against a wall and forced to choose, this might be my favorite line in the whole movie, in the whole musical. And it's said by Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams, right? And she's trying to, it's the point of the musical when, everything has basically gone against the cause of independence. And she is rallying, Abigail is rallying John's spirits. And she says, "Have you forgotten what you used to say to me? I haven't. Commitment, Abby, commitment. There are only two creatures of value on the face of this earth, those with a commitment and those who require the commitment of others." Okay? That is great. That gets to the heart of commitment. The only two things, right? One of two only worthwhile things in this life is something or someone with commitment to something. Because if you don't have commitment, then you're dead in the water and you're just going with the flow, as Hallmark showed. That's the real reason to be mad at them. And if I just had to add a cherry on top of that, I would say that this just proves again that culture trumps economics. There was a tweet that I saw this past week by Lauren Chen, the roaming millennial, when Hallmark originally said that the commercials were not going to air, their first 180. And she was saying, well, of course, their base is mostly, women, who right? Who do this? Who are mostly, conservative or conservative leaning women. Of course they're going to go, with their base. It just makes economic sense. Well, not so much. Because what this proves, again, like with Chick-fil-A, that even if you're doing okay economically, the culture is what is going to make a lot of people, that's going to be the deciding factor in a lot of decisions. So, if you want institutions like Chick-fil-A and Hallmark, if you want institutions that actually reflect what you believe, your values, your principles, your beliefs, okay, I'm talking in the plural. We, if you, excuse me, if you identify on the right, or if you identify specifically as a conservative, it will require taking back the culture. It will actually require taking the phrase culture war seriously. Okay? That is what it's going to take. It's not going to be able. The sign-in petitions, they were great. I signed petitions too, here and there, not as much as in the past. You know what? If there's a petition, if there's a good cause, and there's like a, sign up, to protest this and protest that, gesundheit, go for it. My point though is, what are we going to be willing to do as a next step? Right? Just kind of food for thought. But as always, I have talked too long, so I am going to say, have a great weekend. I will see you all on Tuesday. Merry Christmas. Ciao, gang.